it's Alicia. So it was raining pretty hard this morning and it finally stopped, so I thought it would be a good idea to have a change of scenery and film outside on my balcony. So in today's tutorial, I am making a vintage inspired top. So recently I've been getting into more vintage silhouettes and I especially like how different and interesting the necklines are. And to make this top, I thrifted a large men's dress shirt, and I especially like how pearly the fabric is and how the shade changes color depending on where the light hits it. So let's get started with the tutorial. Start by seam ripping the pocket off. Between the third and fourth button, cut the shirt straight across. Now I'm marking the line to make sure it's straight because sometimes the ruler shifts while cutting with a rotary cutter. Put the bottom on the side for now and we'll start making the top. I hand marked how I wanted the neckline to be. To make adjustments easier, cut away the sleeves and the collar. Now I can easily cut the neckline. For the end, I should have just continued to cut following the curve, but instead I made it more complicated. I'm not sure why. Use a piece you just cut to trace out the other side like that the two sides are symmetrical. And cut it out. And for the back neckline, hand draw a curve that connects the necklines. And this is how the neckline will look like. Use a shirt that is a bit flowy on you and use it to trace the new side seams and armholes. To trace the armholes, put your finger on the seam and lift up the fabric. And do the same thing for the other side. Cut the extra fabric and leave 3/4 of an inch of seam allowance. And I'm leaving enough fabric to be able to hide all the raw edges, and I'll show you how to do that later on. I should have done this earlier, but cut the neckline by continuing the curve. For the sleeves, place them 1 inch below the fold of the fabric so that the sleeves can ruffle, and trace the sleeves. Cut the sleeves and again leave a large seam allowance. Use the sleeve you just cut as a pattern piece for the second sleeve. I wanted to attach the original cuffs to the sleeves, but they were too thick and not long enough, so I made tinier ones. Cut 3 inches off the bottom of both sleeves, and you should have two 13 by 3 rectangles. To hem the neckline, I made a facing. To do this, you trace a neckline on a piece of paper and add about 1.5 inches all around. To avoid fraying, I cut the bottom layer with pinking shears. The best way to avoid fraying would be to use a serger, but I don't own one. And then sew all around the edge of the neckline. Clip the corners and fold the facing inside the top. Ironing it will make the facing stay inside and make the edges clean. And to make sure the facing stays in place, fold the extra fabric near the button placket and hand sew it closed. Also hand sew at the shoulder seams and at the back neckline. This was actually my first time hemming with a facing and I really like how clean it looks. Next, I'm going to ruffle the top of the sleeves. Add a marking at 4 inches below the top of the sleeve on both sides. From those two markings, sew a basting stitch. And before ruffling the sleeve, start pinning it to the armhole. Pin normally until you reach the basting stitch. And start pulling on one of the threads to create ruffles. Do that until the sleeve fits the armhole and pin it down. Sew across and don't forget to leave a big seam allowance. And now I'll show you how to hide the raw edges. Cut only one of the seam allowances in half. Fold the longer seam allowance twice and pin it to the fabric. Continue that for the rest of the raw edges. The ruffle part will be harder to fold, so take your time while doing that. And sew it down. Fold the top right sides together and sew the side seams. And again, I'm leaving a 3/4 of an inch of seam allowance. Hide the raw edges by using the same technique for the sleeves. Okay, so I'm conflicted. My original idea was to attach the bottom of the shirt to make a sort of baby doll dress, like ruffle it up and then attach it to the top. But I think it actually looks better like as a top alone. I was thinking of like adding a 2-inch waistband at the bottom to make it longer. I've seen a lot of clothes like this in Japan where they have a waistband and then from here they have 2 straps to make a bow in the front. And I'm thinking of changing my design to that. This is already just a shirt alone without the skirt, and I added a skirt I already owned to it and it already looks a lot cuter than the dress that I had in mind. So I think I'm gonna continue with this design. To make the waistband, I cut 5 inches off the remaining fabric. Unbutton it and it gives this long piece of fabric. Put it next to the top and cut it to size. Flip it right sides together and sew it. Next, add interfacing to half of the waistband and iron it to make it stick to the fabric. Interfacing acts as a stabilizer, so it'll make the fabric more sturdy. My interfacing wasn't long enough to go all around, so I just added some more on the other side. Fold it in half and here is the waistband. Sandwich the top between the waistband and make sure the interfacing is on the bottom and that the right sides are touching. Sew the waistband to the top, and this time you can sew with a normal seam allowance. Mine was about 1/4 of an inch. Fold the waistband to its right side, flip the top inside out, and fold the waistband in half. Fold the edge once so that all of the raw edges are hidden. Make sure to sew as straight as possible because the seams will be visible on the other side. And here's the completed waistband. Next, add interfacing to the new sleeve cuffs. Fold it in half, right sides together. And I really like the corners of the original cuff, so I'm using those as a template. Also add a seam allowance to the sides. And sew it by following the markings. Flip it and adjust the corners. And iron it down so it stays flat. Overlap the ends just a bit, and here is the cuff. It should be smaller than the sleeve, so we're going to create some ruffles. Sew a basting stitch all around the sleeve. And gather the fabric until it fits the cuff. Place the cuff over the sleeve with the raw edges touching, and make sure that the overlapping of the ends are at the top of the sleeve. Pinning down by pinning the 4 corners first, then pin the rest. And sew it down carefully. Flip the cuff and the sleeve is almost done. I'm going to sew a button right where the cuffs overlap. A trick to sew buttons quickly is to double your thread, so you only have to hand sew through the button about 2 to 3 times. The final step is to make the waist tie. Using the remaining of the fabric, cut 2 4-inch strips. Cut off any extra fabric. My length for each tie is 26 inches. Fold them right sides together and sew on the edge. Sew the end of the strip in the shape of a triangle, and sew all the way down. Cut the extra fabric and clip the corners off. I found a very easy way to flip strips of fabric. First you flip the end that is closed with your fingers, then you insert a stick. I use a barbecue skewer, and the fabric should flip very quickly. Usually this can take a good 30 minutes to do, but with this technique it only took me a minute. Now you can use the stick to unfold the corners. Take the stick out, iron it, and the ties are done. And sew both of them to the sides of the waistband. First sew it with the strip pointing towards the back. Flip it on the other side and sew a rectangle shape. And we're done! Thank you so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. This is actually the favorite top that I've ever made, and I really like how it turned out. So thank you so much for watching. Bye!